His resume will be somewhat familiar to a bunch of you, and in the last few minutes they've been reading some of the books. So.
You guys done?
So John has been involved in a bunch of pretty interesting ventures. He was one of the founding editors of Wired magazine years ago, and more recently one of the founders of the Industry Standard, which was a very influential magazine in the time of the boom. More recently he's become probably one of the leading experts on search outside of Google or the other search companies, the most knowledgeable person on that, and in a peculiarly appropriate position to make some interesting judgments and commentaries on search business as a whole, both on Google and sort of broadly. He has a very interesting blog, which I highly recommend, just very well written and interesting. And he's going to talk today about the book that you're holding in your hands, The Search. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John.
I'm still trying to figure out which passages I want to point you to, because this is a unique audience. How many of you joined? Yeah. How many of you read the book? All right, so I'm doing the math here, about 4%. How many of you plan to read the book? That's the question. Are you supposed to raise your hand? Okay. How many of you have been to Mountain View? Raise your hand. Holy shit, look at that. Oh, so they have sales conferences there, right? Is that what it is? Because how many of you are in the advertising unit in some way or another? Engineering? Wow.
And we send all the engineers out to California on a regular basis.
Yeah, right. Well, and then they send all the ad salespeople in Mountain View out here, right? Oh, since the revenues are here. I've been in the advertising business a long time, both as a content creator, which means that the advertising business paid my salary, and as a publisher. I've been covering the engineering business a long time, and I am not fluent in your language, but I do sort of pretend to be from time to time. I'm actually really interested in business models, and that's why I decided to write a book which featured Google. I'm a tiny bit terrified to be in front of you guys because I reported the hell out of this book, but I know I got almost, everything wrong in your eyes. So one of the things I've said, I spoke at Mountain View as well, is anything that I got wrong, let me know. My email is john@battellemedia.com, and I'll post it and fix it. And the book has gone through 5 printings, and it will clearly go through a paperback. Which means I have a chance to fix things. And I fix things every day on my site. How many of you read the Search blog? Great. Those of you who don't, what are you thinking? I've been posting a lot in the last 2 days. I'm sorry for those of you who read. I've been traveling more than I'd like. But there seems to be something going on today with Microsoft /AOL/Google/ who's going to have the advertising business of AOL story. So if you have any insight on that, see me afterwards. Is that why Tim Armstrong's not here? No comment, yes. In any case, it's very interesting. AOL has been sort of this tetherball for about 10 years now. Anyone who gets the AOL deal seems to make their mark, right? That's how Google made their mark with the AOL deal back in 2000. And late 2000, and that's how Overture made their first profit, was the AOL deal, which Google then stole. So I think Bill Gates and company is trying to buy their way into the game, perhaps. Now, how many of you probably all have been to Google Zeitgeist? Okay, more than half. So I don't need to describe what Zeitgeist is, but since 40% or so of you haven't been to Zeitgeist, it was a trip to Zeitgeist in whenever it came up first, in 2001. It was late 2001, might have been early 2002, that Google Zeitgeist first went live. And Zeitgeist, of course, does, let me just read this, because if I read, then I'll know what the hell I'm saying. The industry standard, by the way, is no longer, just in case you're wondering. And I start the book with that painful memory, because that's just the way to jump in with both feet. So I'll read this section here about how I discovered the story which turned into this book. Still smarting from the loss of my own internet business, and wondering whether the internet story could ever pick itself up off the ground, I stumbled across a link to the first edition of Google Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is a clever public relations tool that summarizes terms that are gaining or losing momentum during a particular period of time. By watching and counting popular search terms, Zeitgeist provides a fascinating summary of what our culture is looking for or finds interesting, and conversely, what was once popular that is losing cultural momentum. Since 2001, Google has maintained a weekly Zeitgeist on its press relations site, but the link I found was the company's first ever version of the tool, and it summarized the entire year and what a year 2001 was, certainly if you were in New York. Listed among the top gaining queries were Nostradamus, number 1, CNN, number 2, and of course that was a navigational query. People were looking for CNN because they couldn't get to it because it was swamped, and people wanted to know what was going on. So they went to Google, assuming that somehow Google would magically get them there. And of course, initially Google did not, and then someone came with the idea of caching CNN, and that became Google News. That's an aside, that's actually not in the book. I mean, it is in the book, it's just not where I was reading. World Trade Center, number 3, and anthrax, number 5. The only term to break into the top 5 that was not related to the terrorist attacks, a collective fantasy about magic and children, Harry Potter, at number 4. The fastest declining queries demonstrated how quickly our culture was abandoning frivolity. Pokemon was number 1, followed closely by Napster, Big Brother, X-Men, and the woman who wants to marry a multi-millionaire. I actually made a decision not to put her name in the book because I didn't want to give her any Google juice when this got scanned. Of course, this hasn't been scanned because my publisher has decided to sue you guys. I'm not very pleased with that. I called my publisher and I said, "What the hell are you doing? You're protecting what we're afraid of." We can talk about that in the Q&A. I was transfixed. Zeitgeist revealed to me that Google had more than its finger on the pulse of our culture. It was directly jacked into that culture's nervous system. That was my first glimpse into what I came to call the database of intentions. My God, I thought, Google knows what our culture wants. Given the millions upon millions of queries streaming into its servers each hour, it seemed to me that the company was sitting on a gold mine of information. Entire publishing businesses could be created from the traces of intent evident in such a database. Could it not also start a research and marketing company capable of telling clients exactly what people were buying, looking to buy, or avoiding? How about starting an e-commerce firm that already knew what the buyer wanted? How about a travel business that knew where the customer wanted to go? The possibilities, it seemed, were endless. Not to mention that within Google's rich database lay potential fieldwork for thousands of doctorates in cultural anthropology, psychology, history, and sociology. This little company, I thought to myself, wrapped, and a bit naively, is holding the world by the thoughts. I've got to go see it. Now, I actually had seen it, but it had been a while. In 1998, I had launched the Standard, and Sergey and Larry used to come to our parties and sort of hang out alone. And someone came up and introduced me to them and said, "You've got to meet these guys. They have this cool search engine." And I was like, "Mr. Cool Publisher, Industry Standard guy." I'm like, "How you doing? Really great to meet you." Magistral. And we put Google on the cover of the Industry Standard in September of 1998, and it's never stopped. Everyone puts Google on the cover, but I'm very pleased to say we did it first at the Standard, along with 3 other sites. One of them was Clever, John Kleinberg's site, Kleinberg's Technology, and a couple of others. I think one was Direct Hit, Mike Cassidy's business. But we, under the headline, "Search That Works," which of course in the late 90s, search didn't work very well. And so we thought we would be very clever and say we found some search engines that actually work, and one of them was Google. I didn't really talk to Larry and Sergey again until very much later. But in 2001, when I saw Zeitgeist, I said, okay, I've got to go see this company because maybe this is the pulse that I've been looking for. My story, the story that I covered my whole, pretty much, with a little diversion at the LA Times and a couple other Cuba, but basically the story that I was in love with, that I was passionate about, the digital revolution, the shift of technology in our culture, and what it meant and how it was changing the world. That story was pretty much left for dead in 2001 and 2002, and no one cared about it, and no one here in New York wanted a story. No one wanted to fund a guy like me who had just blown up spectacularly at the Industry Standard. And so I said, well, there's got to be a story. I mean, the last 15 years of my life couldn't have been wasted. So I thought to myself, maybe this company, Google, is a place where the story might break out again. And it just so happened that in the late 80s, I covered networking in the early 90s, and I got to know Eric Schmidt, who had just come over to Google. He was 4 or 5 months into his tenure. And I shot him an email. I just presumed that it was eric@google.com, because that's what it was for other people that I knew at Google at the time. And it worked, and he answered me. He said, "Sure, come on down." And I said, I just want to talk. I don't know what about. I just want to have a conversation. So he was cool. That was when he was sharing an office with an engineer. And I know he's probably still doing that. So we sat down, and we had a conversation, and I kind of did this whole rhapsodic riff that I just read you on. So, "You're sitting on this amazing pile of information. Do you have any idea what you have?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, of course you do. You left Novell." Okay. Of course, everyone thought he was crazy. I mean, you leave $1 billion IT giant to go to a company that doesn't really have a revenue model yet. AdWords was just starting to get some traction in the internet space after the bubble burst, which seemed like a completely insane thing to do from the point of view of people in the IT industry. But clearly Eric was onto something. So I said, "Look, you have the media business, you completely have the media business in your grasp. You could pretty much redefine the whole media business." And I went through how I thought AdWords and AdSense and intent-driven, advertising and all this stuff, CPC and so on and so forth. And he's like, yeah, that's true, but we're a technology company, so, the next big thing we're going to do is going to be another technology breakthrough like we did with search. What's the next big technology breakthrough, John? And I said, I have no idea. As soon as it happens, I'll write about it, but I don't know. And he said, "Well, if you get any clues, let me know." And I said, but this media thing, I swear, it's going to be really big. You're going to be one of the biggest, most redefining media companies in the world. And he's like, I'm not so sure about that. And that was January of 2002. In the meantime, the next year, I decided that I have to write this book because I just get it in my head that there's a very big idea here about how search is changing the world, and I can't get it out of my head. And I went down and saw Bill Gross and everyone at Overtures before Yahoo bought them, and I got more convinced. And then I went and talked to Louis Monnier, and that was it. I wrote a proposal. I got an agent. I went and got this book sold. Back to see Eric a year later, and the first thing he said to me, "Isn't the media business great?" And I said, "You've joined our ranks." He said, "Well, we're a technology business that has media revenues." I'm like, "Okay, well, that's progress." And I remembered conversations when I was at Wired with Bill Gates about this very same subject and the sort of bipolar approach to, are we a technology company, are we a media company? And I counted up all of Gates's investments in media. Remember Red West and all the stuff they did in the game division. And it was in the billions of dollars. I said, "You have to say you're a media player." He's like, "No, we're a technology company. We have software margins. Software margins are good for Wall Street." And so I think that this tension exists within Google a little bit. But actually, if you're at the point of redefining what it means to be a media company, it's not as much of a tension. It is a significant tension, it seems to be. And you're probably in New York feeling this more than they do in California. It's a significant tension for media companies right now. Media companies are feeling Google, and they're not quite sure what they're feeling. They don't know whether they like it or they don't. As a matter of fact, I gave a presentation in which I quote the publisher of The Economist, who stated quite famously that, I've got to get this right, if you're going to sleep with Google, make sure you use protection and get paid. Good old Economist, always good for a quote. Anyways, we'll move on. I want to read another section here. I think this is an important thing, and maybe this is just some feedback for you guys. I've been doing this, talking to people, for 3 months. I did not expect the book to sell much. Usually when you're an author, what you want is your advance. And you want the book to be published, and you get your little sort of, you get to be in the Library of Congress, and that's pretty much what you get as an author. But the book's actually selling, which means that people are calling me and asking me to talk to them, and I come and talk to them, and then I get feedback. One of the things I get asked everywhere I go, and I posted this on my site, is about privacy. And it seems to me that this is an issue which is lying in the bushes somewhere and is waiting to spring out. And you had a little taste of it with the Gmail sort of flap in 2004. Oh my God, I sent an apple pie recipe to my mom, and she got an ad for Washington State apples. And how did they know? Someone's reading my mail. It's a mechanical Turk. But actually, this issue seems big enough that, that perhaps the culture's wanting to have a discussion about it, and I believe I get a chance to talk to you guys, that I get to ask you to lead that conversation as opposed to react to it, because you are in the position of that, having an extraordinary amount of information, both individually detailed information and aggregate information, which is helpful and useful to society, or possibly to governments who we may or may not trust. So I came up with this idea, not new, of the click stream, which is the aggregate of all click streams is the database of intentions. And I just wanted to have a little read about that. Now, and this is an idea that I call sort of going from the ephemeral to the eternal. We are used to sort of most of the things that we do in the computer pre-web being very ephemeral, whether you're digging about in your hard drive looking for something, or looking in your contact database, looking up a number, or making a phone call, or sending an email. For the most part, we think that that's ephemeral. It's not recorded, it's not noticed, it's not eternal. But as we move all of our information and our habits and our livelihoods to web-based services, this information is becoming eternal and therefore recordable. You can subpoena it, you can archive it, you can find useful patterns in it that help create better services, and you can look for suspected terrorists or people you don't like if you're the government or some other malicious actor. And that's just interesting. I'm not an alarmist on this. I believe I have lots of data out there. I'm not concerned about it. But I do believe that it is an issue, and it's one that will probably break out in a way that is unhappy unless you're ahead of that issue. So anyways, the details of our lives are recorded and preserved by hundreds of entities, often commercial in nature. The reason for this shift is simple. Innovative companies have figured out how to deliver great web-based services that also happen to make money, by divining clickstream patterns. Like most material culture, the clickstream is becoming an asset, certainly to the individual, but in particular to the internet industry. Some mine this asset by calculating patterns in the clickstream, Google's PageRank, for example, and others take more direct approaches, such as the algorithms behind Amazon's recommendation system. Most visibly, all search engines mine clickstream data to present advertisements that attempt to match your stated intent. From a consumer's point of view, there are also very simple and compelling reasons for this shift. Services like search, recommendation networks, and email make our lives easier, faster, and more convenient. We're willing to trade some of our privacy, so far anyway, for convenience, service, and power. Search as a problem is about 5% solved, notes Udi Manbear, CEO of Amazon's A9 search engine, which of course is built on top of Google. 5%, and yet the search business has already blossomed into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Search drives clickstreams, and clickstreams drive profits. To profit in the internet space, corporations need access to clickstreams, and this, more than any other reason, is why clickstreams are becoming eternal. So that's kind of the business you're in, is eternalizing clickstreams. Sort of a different way of thinking about it, I think. But I think about my great-great-grandson, who very shortly will be able to say, 100 years from now, what did my great-great-grandfather do on December, what day is it anyways, the 6th? 7th. Yeah, I had a deadline today, that's right. December 7th, 2005. What did he do? Where did he go? What did he post about? What were his clickstreams? I would like him to be able to ask that question, but he can't, because I don't know who has that data and where it is, and I can't pull it together in one thread and present it to my great-great-grandson. I'd like to be able to do that. I think that would be very cool. And I think as a culture, if everyone could do that, we would be doing something really, really deeply interesting. So that's just sort of one of those thoughts. Some call that joints after midnight thinking. Now, of course, you all know that the business model which has made Google so successful, the core business model, the CPC business model, Google was not first, although Google did a very good job of turning it into something that was far more proficient and profitable than prior actors. But I have a chapter in the book about a prior actor, and he is such an interesting guy. I want to introduce you to him. I'm going to read the first 3 or 4 paragraphs of chapter 5, which is called $8 billion, 1 nickel at a time. This is about Overture. Before Overture, of course, was called GoTo, and GoTo was launched out of Idealab, and Idealab is Bill Gross's sort of innovation engine down in Pasadena. It turns out, of course, I'm from Pasadena, so I didn't mind going down to interview him because I got to get some home cooking. But Bill Gross is as sort of opposite a guy to Larry and Sergey as you can get. is, like them, like an engineer and deeply smart, but his energies are quite different, and he's rather manic and very, very verbal. So I write this chapter kind of in his voice, and so when you hear this, remember that, because, well, you'll see why. Had he just stuck to his guns, he'd be the one hailed as the revolutionary, the one on the cover of every business magazine. No, the cover of Time magazine with a guest chair on Charlie Rose to boot. Bill Gross, founder of the company with the most anticipated IPO in the history of Wall Street, the mad genius who rewrote the rules of business and rewired the way our culture understood itself. Indeed, had Bill Gross not given up his argument, had he just followed his gut, there might not even be a Google. Brin and Page might have sold out to Yahoo or Excite or Microsoft or merged with Ask Jeeves or gone the way of Alta Vista, sinking slowly into the dark oceans of corporate M&A. Imagine that. A world with no Google. A world where Brin and Page, those arrogant little upstarts, are no more than forgotten footnotes in a much grander story. The story of a serial entrepreneur with a model past who finally proved himself beyond all possible doubt. Indeed, had this version of history come to pass, this very book would be talking about how go-to transformed our culture. Only, it's not. Bill Gross has not created tens of billions of dollars in market value, at least not yet, and the trail of lawsuits and querulous press clippings littering his past are proof that he failed in his quest to get each and every one of his investors fuck you rich. But Bill Gross can quite legitimately claim to have created the business model that made Google possible, in the process reinventing pretty much the entire economic cardiopulmonary system of the internet. And at the end of the day, that's certainly something. So the argument that Bill Gross gave up was with his CEO and management team. At this point, it was GoTo was trying to figure out whether or not it should be a syndication business, AdSense, or it should be a portal, AdWords. And they were convinced, his management team, he was chairman, they had to choose. Why? Because their biggest customer, AOL, they didn't want to have channel conflict, right? They wanted to either serve and provide them. They didn't want to also say, well, you can go to AOL, but we got better search over here at GoTo.com. So they made the decision to become an OEM syndication business and to give up the portal. And Bill thought that was the wrong thing to do. And of course, what happened next? AOL went to Google. Google remained a destination for search as well as powering other people's search, did both sides of the coin, and Bill was proven right. And he believes that if he had held on to his argument, he might be the one who ended up where you all are now. So that's sort of the tension of the chapter. But then I go into, when Larry Page was 12, of course, he was reading biographies of Nikola Tesla. When Bill Gross was 12, he was arbitraging candy, selling it out of his locker at school. So there's the difference right there. If you do nothing else, read that chapter and the epilogue. I wanted to read one section that really came from a conversation I had with Tim Armstrong. It's about the future of advertising, and it sets up it is set up from a scenario that I sort of created in the book. And the scenario is search meeting television. It's sort of, AdWords meets the upfront, in a way. And all of you are nodding your heads. We're working on that right now. Yes, right, John. There's a demo downstairs, but you don't get to see it. I know. But I can dream, right? And so that's what I did, is I sort of just dreamt out loud, which is the beautiful thing about being an author, is you get to sort of make stuff up from time to time, if it's in the future, of course. It's bad if you do that in the past. But in the future, I created this sort of whole scenario, which I don't think I'll read the whole thing because it would possibly bore you. But basically, I create this scenario where a guy's, first-time dad, something I've been, and is deeply terrified, something I've been, and his wife feels like he's not engaged with the pregnancy, and it's month 8, and he's doing a lot of traveling, and he's busy. And she gave him a book, What to Expect When You're Expecting, and he hasn't read it. He's at home checking his email and trying to ignore the fact that he's about to become a father. And this is maybe a couple of years in the future. he's got search history turned on, and he's got a TiVo or some such device. And there's a marketing arrangement between the cable distributor, TiVo, and search history, Google, and sort of a cookie sharing, all with his knowledge. He's happy with it. And the reason is that when he's sitting at his computer checking email, his wife's on the couch, she's very uncomfortable, and she says, "Why haven't you read the damn book?" And he's like, "Oh, you know, I'll get right on it," right? And he realizes he just left. He had left the book, you know, next to the Gideon Bible in the last hotel. And so he goes on Amazon and he buys another copy of What to Expect, right? Marketing potential is created right there, right? And then he says, okay, I've got a deal. So he goes to Google and searches for, you know, pregnancy 8th month or something like that, right? Baby Center comes up, clicks that link, 2 more marketing potentials, right? The search itself as well as clicking the link to Baby Center. Then he goes on Baby Center and he reads all about the 8th month and he's like, hey, I'm on Baby Center right now. And the wife's like, holy cow. She gets up off the couch, goes over, and they look, and he says, hey, why don't we see if there's anything on television that we might watch together about pregnancy? So he goes to TiVo.com or whatever his television interface is, maybe it's Google Video by this point. And as soon as you clear all those intellectual property hurdles, and the terrified fears of the dinosaurs running Hollywood at the moment, hopefully we'll get to that. So he goes and searches for television programming that have to do with pregnancy and giving birth and maybe, you know, early years of childbearing, whatever, and sees that the Learning Channel has a couple of programs that are coming up. And as a matter of fact, one of them is going to be available for download at 7:30 and at 7:15 or something. So everything's going right? And so he clicks download all those programs, right? Because now, of course, television is like a database object as opposed to a streaming video that's controlled by the head end of your cable company. And they're all excited, and they sort of go over to the television, sit down, and they start, the television program begins, but before it begins, of course, the screen comes up, and there are new advertisements for him. And this is where it all kicks in, because what's happened in the 15 minutes between when he's clicked download the program, and the program is available for download, is that the back end of AdWords is kicked in with all that marketing potential, and there's hundreds of thousands of advertisers who bid for that person at that time because of what that person has said about what they're interested in based on the clickstream. Not just the clickstream he just created, but they also know his zip code, his household income, his age, you know, his Pampers buying habits if he happens to buy Pampers, and so on and so forth. All that information has been brought together into marketing potentials, which is of course for sale in a real-time auction with millions of variables. Who can run a real-time auction with millions of variables? Not many. Creating that ability is, of course, priority number 1 for Microsoft. And it's something you guys already have. So I put that scenario together and kind of describe what happens next, all the offers that come up. And of course, at the end of the day, he ends up buying a Peg Perigo for his wife. A very expensive Mercedes of strollers, because there's a $50 off coupon that was put up to his television screen. And he feels guilty because he hasn't read the book. So everyone wins. So I then, after thinking of this, sat down with Tim Armstrong and said, is this going to happen? It all depends, you know, I said, isn't it all sort of about whether or not someone is intentional, declaring his or her intent that you can then attach your marketing to? Because the whole world I was from was content attachment marketing, a magazine. You attach the marketing to the content. You don't attach the marketing to the intent, because there's no intent to attach. The intent is proxied by the content. Now you have direct, pure, unadulterated intent, which you can attach your marketing to. That is paid search, right? Think if you could do that in television, oh my God, you know, return on investment driven advertising in television. Whoa. And also that, Peg Perigo has never been a national advertiser, never would be a national advertiser. It doesn't work. Their channel is retail. But if the channel becomes a true sales channel through marketing, it's no longer marketing. That's the point Tim made. That is, I'm now reading, that is the magic of intent-based marketing. It shifts marketing dollars from the unknown to the knowable. As Tim Armstrong, VP of Advertising at Google, puts it, search turns a cost center into a profit center. I asked Armstrong what he thinks marketing will look like in 10 years. His answer, if you can imagine 10 years from now, every major and small advertiser with a totally digitized marketing asset set. So everything they can market is digitized with attributes against that. And they have hundreds of inbound and outbound feeds and hundreds of places that either accept these feeds or pull them in. So in the future, I think marketers are going to be agnostic about where their offer ends up. They're going to be driven by the return on investment. And I think most of the publishers on the web, and think of the web as including television, and most of the major other players on the web are going to be able to put offers in front of people at exactly the right time. I think a lot of people today think Overture and Google. I think a lot of people today think Google and Overture when they think of ROI advertising. I'd like to think that in 10 years they think only about Google. But more likely, there will be ad systems in the back and tools that track ROI and conversions across multiple platforms and media. Advertising will be mostly margin driven. Think about that for a minute. The entire foundation of marketing, $100 billion industry driving, well, nearly every business on this planet, is shifting, slowly but surely, to a new model, one informed by the simple idea of people looking for things on a search engine. No wonder Jan Peterson, chief scientist for search and marketplace at Yahoo, recently quipped, "We think of shopping as basically an application of search." And then the next section is called "They're All Search Businesses," in which I basically claim search is everything. But I thought that was a very, very good insight, and it's true, and you are certainly seeing this, but in the cases of, and they're not all like this, but in the cases where if you put $1 in, you get $1.50 back, you put as many dollars in as you can, because that's a perpetual motion machine. It's actually better than a perpetual motion machine. It's a positive energy machine. And of course, then you hit supply. You hit the ceiling of supply. And then you start to put in dollars just for branding, which is all margin. So that's good. But still in all, it's just a very interesting idea, and it's one that the advertising industry is still haven't really wrapped their heads completely around that idea. But it's a very important one. And let's see. We'll get to Q&A. I think I'll just end it there. I don't want to read it more to you. I'd love to just get into a conversation and have a Q&A. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to that which I've said. Are there any questions? Anything you want to talk about? Can I ask you guys questions? Back over here. The question was, what about Google Book Search? I'll be honest with you. I think that there's a really big principle at stake here, beyond books, that has to do with whether or not, who has access and control to information and who has the right to control that access. Is it the publishers? Is it the authors? Is it the public's right? There's a common good question that is a very big question, which it seems to me that Google has thought through and decided they come down on a particular side of that question and they're going to push on it. End of story. It also, of course, makes Google look to many people rapacious and hungry to feed its content index in order to make more money. And I think that while this is going to turn on the points of law, on the Copyright Act and its various amendments and interpretations, the real issue here for publishers has nothing to do with copyright. It has everything to do with money. Now maybe copyright is a proxy for money, and oftentimes is, but I think this has to do with the fact that the publishers don't know what you're going to do 10, 20, 100 years from now with those copies of the books. And whatever it is they want to make sure they get their cut. But they don't just want you to determine what their cut is. They want to control the business model. Because that's what they've done for the last, when was Gutenberg? 600 years? And they've done it for a long time and controlled the business model. And this development is taking business model control out of their hands. Now, my view is that that's not a bad thing. They then need to figure out how they get their piece of business model control back. And there's another person in this equation. The author, hello. I would like a little piece of that business model control myself. As a matter of fact, one of the things I like about the book business is that they don't own the intellectual property. I do. I'm licensing it to them to create a book. But I own the original intellectual property. So I think over time, the idea that perhaps the authors are the ones who decide what happens to this text is not a bad idea. And I think a huge, massively scaled platform that scales to the tail and allows for books to be printed on demand or read on demand, where a couple of shekels get thrown into the, into the mix whenever that happens. Read a paper page thing that is now developing and so on. It's all good, And we should move that way. I understand the book publisher's point of view. I don't agree with them, but I understand where they're coming from. They're terrified of what Google means in terms of the business model, that they don't yet have their head around. Neither do any of us really. We just know that there's going to be a great explosion of potential things that could happen once we free this from its current, sort of archaic approach. One last thing on that. I don't think Google, with its negotiation approaches, has made a lot of friends. I've gotten incredible feedback from publishers that they believe that Google is not listening, is not engaging, and is being a bit arrogant. Whether or not that's true, I mean, that's one side of the story. I'm just giving you the feedback that I've been told by the publishers themselves. Yeah, that's their perception. Yeah. Any other questions?
So I'm interested in this privacy issue. And you brought up an interesting point. Google's storing all this information. So your point was you would like to have access to your personal information. Is that sort of the main demand that would make it all right, that we're collecting all this information?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't know whether or not my view of it is right, but I know what I would like, and having a lot of conversation with a lot of people about this idea. I would like to be able to know what information is known about me through a trusted relationship. Like I can say, here I declare this is who I am, therefore show me the information you have about me. I would like to be able to protest and edit that information. In other words, this information is wrong, or I would like this deleted from the index. I'm happy to co-own that information, not completely own that information, because of course it's created by interacting with a service that I don't own, so I'm okay with that. I would like to know who else has access to this information, in what circumstances, and to what end. I may not be able to control that, but I want to know, right? If I could have that knowledge and be able to sort of control access to it in terms of making a thing, turning it into a thing so that I can give that thing to my great-grandson, so to speak, that would be really cool. And there's been some recent developments. One of them is called Attention Trust that has come up, where people are basically putting this sort of Attention Trust widget in front of their browser, so everything they do gets captured, and it's sort of like, well, here's my copy of my information over here, and I'm going to then upload that to services which are going to do cool things with that copy of that information in a relationship of trust. It's an interesting idea. It requires a problem. In other words, there isn't that problem yet where people are going to flock to Attention Trust and stick the widget in, because we don't all tag them delicious, so.
Is the idea that the Attention Trust prevents the other end from...
It doesn't prevent anything. It simply records so you've got your own copy, which I think is a great idea. Of course, they don't have it for the Mac. And other things, I might say, don't exist for the Mac from large platform players. Casa. But anyways, I think it's a good idea, but again, I think it's sort of one of these things that, it's like PGP, right? PGP, great idea. I remember at Wired, we put it on the cover, no one used it because no one thought there was a problem, right? So you need to have a problem, but we don't want this kind of problem. You don't want this kind of problem. I created a scenario on my site last week in which I laid out a potential kind of problem like this, which has been roundly criticized on my site. So, however, I still believe it. I'll modify it though. In the back.
Yeah, so actually about that post from the other day, continuing the privacy debate, has a big post about the nightmare scenario of privacy, and like engineer goes and like starts killing people because he's stalking them and stuff.
Right.
And it posed a big problem, but he didn't really post any kind of possible solution to that.
I think the solution is what we were discussing.
Okay. So
in other words, I think that people, if we already had a process by which people, because the scenario was basically that a series of pretty blonde women start getting offed. And the reason I say pretty blonde is because the media can't help themselves when it comes to pretty blonde women getting killed. They just put them, CNN puts a bug up, pretty blonde woman getting killed of the week, They can't get over themselves, right? And so I put that together with the idea that the way that these blonde women are getting killed is that an engineer within a large internet services company is compiling a dossier of information about them and sort of stalking them through all that information. search history, email, you can imagine, all the things, photographs, blog posts, everything that you might aggregate, creates a dossier which he then labels hot young things, and so then it becomes the Google hot young things killer, right? And you can imagine what happens. An O.J. Simpson string. It's it's like national media, and all of a sudden everyone's freaking out, and they're all calling you. What do you know about me? Do you have an answer? No, you're not ready to answer that question. You can't. If you already had what we've been discussing in place, this wouldn't have happened. It would be like, okay, that sucks, but I'm in a relationship of trust with my, I know what they know, and this was sort of this rogue guy who kind of, I think, that's what I was trying to point out. I didn't get to the second piece of the post yet, because I'm still defending the first post from all the people who think it's completely crazy, it'll never happen in any way, it could happen at the DMV. Okay, the DMV is not Google, or Yahoo, or any of these other hugely trusted brands. It's the friggin' DMV. Anyway, so I haven't been able to engage in that fisticuffs yet with my readers, but I'm looking forward to it. Is there someone else?
In the same vein that you were excited by Google back in 2001 by Zeitgeist, is there a company today that you've come across or are interested in?
What a good question. What an interesting question. Is there a company like Google now that is getting me excited? I'm starting a company. So that's the one, actually. It's called Federated Media, and I couldn't but start it. It's like the standard of Wired. I don't like starting companies. It's not like, frankly, what I'd want to do, but it has me, just like that did. And that had me in then 3 years, right, to do this. So this has me, and the company's in the media space, and it's a publishing company, and it's federating authors together, not book authors per se, but blog authors, high-quality blog authors. What's astounding to me, I'm the band manager for Boing Boing. Didn't you read Boing Boing? It's a blog on the internet. It has 2.2 million readers a month. 2.2 million readers a month. Now, if you're a publisher, okay, Wired is 650,000 readers a month. Industry standard never got past 250,000 readers a month. So 2.2 million readers a month on one site. My site has 150,000 readers a month. My little search blog site is almost as big as the standard was. Something's happening there. Something very important is happening there. And I want to be part of that. So I'm federating high-quality sites together as federations, and I'm providing them author services in a distributed publisher model where I don't own their content. I let them do what they do, and provide them services and get paid for the revenue I bring them. I'm in competition with all of you, basically. Because I have an ad network and all that kind of good stuff, but it's not CPC. It's pure branding and some conversational, high-value, relationship-driven advertising marketing stuff. But I'm really excited by it, and I think that there's something happening in the media business that's turned upside down because of search, and there's a huge opportunity to rethink media models, and I think that's the most exciting thing. So it's the same idea. It's exactly the idea I had in 2001 when I saw Zeitgeist, and I said, the media business is never going to be the same. And now it's, so many of these businesses now, little ones, just left Union Square Ventures, where I saw Josh Schachter and Delicious, and there's just all this stuff fermenting and bubbling up that's really cool, and we don't know what's going to work or not, but it's worth trying.
Do you think the media business is still going to be called the media business in 10 years?
Yes.
So, for instance, if I give you a book that has nothing printed in it, or a CD that has nothing inscribed on it, does it have any value to you?
No, it's a transport mechanism. I mean, the content business, perhaps. I believe, like, my central thesis of my business, and sort of every time I talk about the stuff to the media business, which I do a fair amount of, because they're all, as I said, terrified of you. And they say, John, what do we do? And I say, pay your authors more. That's the first thing I say. And then be driven by content. Don't be driven by distribution. Because Comcast is driven by distribution. We own the cable, right? And books are driven by their monopoly on form and the fact that printing presses are expensive. But out here in the wilds of the internet, it's not about distribution. You have these massive attention distribution engines called search engines. And then you have very low barriers to entry to create content and be found. If you have good content, you get found. And because people point to you. It's a point to economy. And so I think the content business, but of course, that's such a negative implication, the content business, because that's what the media people say. Well, it's the content. You know, I've got my content over here, my distribution over here, and I put them two together and I make a bunch of money. I think authors are not used to sort of having their own, you know, mojo, really. And stars get it, right? But you know, they can dictate their back end. But generally, people who create content are seen as sort of outsourced folks. I think they can become more part of the mainstream and be more drivers of the business themselves.
So you've just told us about some of the advice you're giving to our traditional media companies. Have you seen anything interesting coming from them beyond like sue Google, but you know, something more?
Anything interesting coming out of the mainstream media businesses?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of great content comes out of the mainstream media business. In terms of business models or approaches, okay, nothing's coming to mind. That doesn't mean that's really, no. No, I think the New York Times is really an interesting company, and they're doing a lot of things. Sure, okay, actually, yes. Rupert Murdoch barring MySpace. Okay, I have not validated this claim, but according to a widely circulated number, which of course is often wrong, particularly when it involves Google, it's always too low, is that MySpace represents 10% of the advertising avails on the internet. 10% of the potential advertising avails on the internet, and this is CPM advertising avails, as I'm assuming. I think it might be even page views. 10%. And the demographic is, of course, you know, 16 to 20, basically, right? Which is highly, highly sought after. So Rupert Murdoch buying that company, what would you spend to get 10% of the advertising avails on the internet with that demographic? 600 million sounds like a total deal. So I think buying that company was a stroke of genius if it pays out. You know, I mean, we had the AOL ICQ deal, right? Where you're like, huh? At least I was like, what? You know, and I'm still kind of, I mean, ICQ is basically, AIM is now sort of AOL's, one of their, you know, standard bearers for the value of the company. But this deal seems to me to be really, really smart. And so I think that's something that I have long advised large media companies to go buy these assets, because inventing them within the culture of those large media companies is nearly impossible. I know, I've tried. The Standard was owned by a large media company. It was not fun to try to do something new within it. But so I think that kind of stuff is new, and I think it was very, very smart of Ross and Rupert to do that. But you know, it's a business that I think got comfortable with its distribution lockup, frankly. And you know, having a newspaper was like a license to print money. Having a radio station, license to print money. Having a television channel, same. And so you stop to think about innovating in your business model when you're, you know, when you've got so much profit coming in just because you happen to be in the right place. So, I mean, that's a condemnation of the entire media industry, but take it with a grain of salt. I haven't looked at everything, so I don't know.
So, just to pick up on what you were just saying, you know, when you're at the center of a lot of cash, you stop innovating. I'd be curious to get your insight on this meme that was sort of more popular about 6 months ago, that Yahoo is innovating much more quickly than Google. And, you know, do you feel there's truth to that? If so, why do you see that happening?
It's my view that Yahoo innovates with a business case. You don't see innovations coming out of Yahoo until the business case has been vetted by the executive committee. It's just true. They have a very, you know, traditional and rigid approach to what they greenlight and why and how it all fits together in the master plan. You know, there's sort of a McKinsey-ite approach to innovation there. And it turned out that during that period of time, really sort of late 04, early 05, there were a lot of things that were being rolled out one after the other that seemed smart and well-timed. They haven't all played out. 360 and MyWeb 2.0 are interesting ideas which haven't gotten critical mass. Now, the same could be said of a lot of things that have come out of Google, you know, or Coot, although in Brazil I hear it's #1.
It's huge.
I keep getting friends who want to add me from Brazil. You know, I don't know anyone in Brazil. Well, you could. And people wonder, and I don't know, people wonder how big is Gmail, although it's a great product. People wonder about Toolbar because you're promoting it heavily, and so people wonder whether that means something. But I don't think innovation has slowed at all in this company. I think it's a question of what does the brand allow and what does the brand not allow, and what's expected from the consumer, and what's the right, there are a lot of things that come out of Google that seem to be thrown against the wall. That seems to be the model, is spinning stuff centrifugally from the engineering core out to the wall. And then the question to me is whether or not they don't stick because they don't have enough sort of wood behind the arrow, there isn't enough resources over here that help it keep going, or whether the test of an innovation at Google is, sorry, we're just going to throw it against the wall, and we got to wait for the consumers to get behind it. We're not going to do anything more than stick it out there, right? Whereas Yahoo's like, here's product, here's the marketing plan, here's the integration plan, here's the this, and then you're going to know in 2 years, right? Whereas with Google, it's sort of like it gets out there and then well, okay, 3 months later it hasn't really taken off, so we're off to the next thing, right? That total outsider perspective, no idea whether that's how it is. That's just how it seems to be. Except for some really key things that have clearly gotten into the, we got a product manager bucket, like local, right? It has a product management team, and we can't just wait to see if it falls off the wall. We got to keep this one going forward, right? But talk. Don't know yet, but obviously that's critical and strategic from the point of view of Yahoo. It's like, I talked to Brad Garlinghouse 3 days ago, the guy who runs communications for Yahoo. He's like, I am, VoIP, and you just don't get that sense of the business guy driving the hell out of the product here at Google. You just don't feel that ever, here. I've criticized the company for that. I think that sometimes you need that, MBA with fire. I wouldn't say you need too many. For all these MBAs out there, I'm sorry if I offended you. But you do need some. But the culture has not been driven by that in the past, and I think the culture succeeded wildly because it wasn't driven by that. So, but what are you, 5,000? 5,550 continue. So, at some point, you're going to need some, well, I know Shona Brown is working on that. It's her business operations, right? She's the McKinsey I know the bunch. Others? Here.
You mentioned the context of book search programs, that there's been some perception that Google could handle it better. In terms of other areas of partnership we have, Maps and Apps, other places where we keep hearing about ways to go through.
So the question is the book, if there was some pushback on the book stuff, what about other partnerships? My sense is that most of the rest of the kind of claims of hard to reach, dismissive, arrogant, whatever, which you hear a lot, remind me of the same thing that you've heard with any company that's succeeded beyond its ability to answer a phone call, which has happened with Microsoft, it happened with Apple, it happened with Netscape, it happened with the Standard. And we had 400 pages of advertising coming in a week. And we had a book that could only accommodate 120. So that meant that we were pissing off, 280 advertisers every week, which meant we got a reputation as being arrogant. Okay, I'm sorry, but, how do you deal with that? Well, you just say you're sorry as much as you can, you call back as soon as you can, you hire as many people as you can, like you hired 300 people since I was here last. And you do your best. I think most of it has to do with that, but when it comes to these issues, where I think the company has fixed what it believes is right, you do run into that sort of, they dig their heels and they don't listen. And then there's the other piece, sorry, I know we're out of time, which has to do with approaches to doing M&A due diligence, which I think there's a post on my site, search for Kozuru and read that post, and you'll see what I mean. That is just a story. That's all it is. But those anecdotes get out, especially when megaphones like me are paying attention to them. So, But I think, given all the incoming, Google's doing an extraordinary job of not blowing up. It's amazing because growing this quickly, you clearly have a culture that can hold at the center because otherwise you just wouldn't be able to pull it off. So I'm a fan.
Great, so John's going to be around for another 15 minutes signing books, and he'll be able to answer. You can walk and chew gum, right? So,
I think so.
if you have more questions, chat with him while he's signing. But again, thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.